Mr. Chair, we are live on YouTube, and I believe we do have a quorum.
Sorry about that. I am back. So we have 1 o'clock. Does it appear we have a quorum, Chet?
Yes, sir.
And you're doing this solo without Nicole, is that correct?
Yes, please bear with me, everybody.
Okay, we're here to support you, Chet. So first thing is the virtual meeting. We have the standing statement that's posted on the website regarding virtual meetings, which, since this is not a body of elected officials, we have the option of continuing to meet virtually for now. Is that correct?
That is correct. Because of City of Richmond action, we have this capability at least through December at this point.
Okay, and we can have further discussion as to whether the future CVTA TAC meetings can be virtual or in person between now and December. So with that being said, we need a roll call and certification of a quorum.
Yes, sir. Let's start with Town of Ashland. Ms. Amos. Charles City County, Ms. Russell.
Here.
Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Hanover County, I believe Mr. Flagg is here, correct?
Yes. Mr.
Mr. Okay. Henrico County, Mr. Ure.
Here.
New Kent County, Mr. Stauder. We'll circle back. Powhatan County, Mr. Chardon.
Here.
And City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Here.
Excellent. Let's circle back to Ms. Amos, Town of Ashland. All right, and New Kent County, Mr. Stauder. Okay, Mr. Chair, we can circle back, but we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Chet. Next item is the consideration of amendments to the action meeting agenda. Do we have any known amendments, Chet?
No, we do not. Agenda stands as presented.
Okay, and next item 2 on the agenda is the approval of the June 14th, 2021 CVTA TAC action meeting minutes. If everybody's had a chance to review, does anybody have any corrections, deletions? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Barb Smith, so moved.
All right.
Mike Campbell seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, we'll take a voice vote on this. Everybody in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item is public comment period. Do we have anybody requesting public comment?
No, sir, we have not received any advance requests for public comment.
Okay, thank you. Next item, CVTA TAC Chairman's report. I have nothing to report at this point, so hopefully everybody is having a enjoyable summer, even though all of us are here. So, next item is the TAC staff update. Chet, can you provide that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. We do have the standing item for the Finance Committee update, although the Finance Committee has not met since the last time TAC met. So I do not have an update for that right now. Mr. Chair, if it's all right, this might be the time to discuss the invoicing.
Yes, actually, before we get to that, so the next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for when, Chet?
I
Sorry to throw that at you.
Let me.
It
let me
is
check.
Friday.
Oh, that's right. It's 10:30 Friday following the authority.
Is that gonna be a full meeting or is that just a meeting to elect the chair and vice chair?
It is let me pull it up while we're sitting here. So the agenda is election of the chair and vice chair, and then future meeting schedule.
Okay, so not really a full meeting.
Correct.
Got it. They will have an August meeting.
I believe that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Well, I could look at that right now. Yes, Finance Committee, the proposed August meeting is the 11th.
Unless
Yeah.
they choose to cancel it.
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Do you want to get into the invoice item now?
Yes, so the agenda topic later this morning on the Transit Service Governance Report, we have received, staff received the 2 invoices from our consultant for the work that's been done on the Transit Service Governance Report. And staff's recommendation is that we review that and work with the chair and vice chair to provide a recommendation on how to move forward. I think if we follow the proper procedure, TAC would make a recommendation, and because this is related to invoicing, that should go through finance. Is my recommendation before going to the full authority for payment. But at this point, staff hasn't been able to fully review the invoices. So I think it's even though there is an authority meeting on Friday, finance won't meet before that. So I think the proper way to review this is to hold any recommendations until August.
Okay, very good. So that doesn't create any issues with respect to closing out the task.
No, I don't believe so.
Very good. Anybody have any questions or concerns about that approach? All right, hearing none. Did you need to go further into the Finance Committee update? Are you good?
I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. Very good. Next item, 6, regional project prioritization update. And I see Ms. Chessa Walker from Chesterfield is kind enough to join us for that update.
Afternoon, everybody. Quick update on the work of the subcommittee. Last week or a couple weeks ago, we reviewed the long-range transportation plan of methodology for scoring and evaluating projects. We're using that methodology, and we are considering, or the recommendation that we talked through at the last meeting was to possibly pare that down to just a few measures that are most applicable. So we're still working through that. Exactly which evaluation measures we want to use. We'll revisit that this Friday. Hopefully we can get some consensus on what approach we want to take. We will be discussing, we touched on it at the last meeting, and we'll pick it back up, is how we are going to approach scoring bridge rehabilitation and replacement type projects. So we've done some work behind the scenes on that we'll bring forward to the group on Friday to talk about how we plan to score and rank bridge rehab and replacement projects. So hopefully we can get through at the next meeting on Friday, like I said, wrap up which evaluation measures we want to use. And from there, it's just documenting the guidelines that we want, or the recommendation for the process we want to bring forward to the full authority for approval. So I think we're close. We're almost there. So hopefully this next meeting on Friday, we can wrap up some loose ends and keep it moving. So.
Thank you, Chessa. Any questions or comments for Chessa?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Dorana.
Yes, I just wanted to bring up to the, just the full tag a question that I was asking about in the subcommittee, for the regional prioritization, and that was um, of feasibility studies and plans for eligibility for regional funding. And one of the things the reason why I wanted to ask others' opinions was because, generally speaking, if a locality had a project that they wanted, there is some input from the group that locality would fund the feasibility study for that project, and which could be understandably something that would be appropriate. But then there was the issue, or the question rather, that Richmond had been posed in regard to regional projects, feasibility, and things that would be of large economic development, or of some ideas that are being outside of, say, a locality, but per se maybe some of the other authority members. And right now, we didn't have feasibility or plans as an eligible expense. And so I just wanted to know if anybody wanted to provide any opinion or input on that, as we look to finalize the governance, the prioritization process for the regional funds for CVTA.
Dorana, thank you for that comment or question. I know this was, you did bring this up last Friday, and we did talk about it a little bit. I think it's probably going to be talked about more thoroughly at the subcommittee meeting this coming Friday, which some, but not everybody on this group will be in that meeting. So certainly we want input from the entirety of the group. I don't know if anybody has any opinions now. Otherwise, certainly provide that information back, probably through Chessa would be the best resource for further discussion and consideration this Friday. Does that sound reasonable to you, Dorana?
Yes, definitely. I think I brought it up, if no one on the line has any comment, if you would definitely share with your representatives and see if you can gather any input from them, that would be helpful, and provide that to Chessa or any one of the subcommittee members. Myself would be great.
Sounds good. We can bring that forward on Friday too.
Maybe a question for Chet, and I don't see Eric on, but we want to make sure that if we do consider allowing regional funding to be used for studies, is that permitted within the language of the code and the enabling legislation? I don't know the answer to that.
Yes, sir. I think this is Chad. I think we'll be prepared to talk about all that on Friday.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions or comments for Chessa or the group regarding the regional project prioritization? Okay, hearing none, moving on to item 7, draft transit governance report. Chad, are you going to kick that off? And I see we have the AECOM team here to help.
Yes, thank you. This is I've shared the screen. Hopefully everyone is able to see it, and I'm doing this correctly. We are at the point where the Transit Service Governance Subcommittee has thoroughly reviewed the draft report that has been guided through the work of AECOM and the Enos Center for Transportation. And at this point, the subcommittee has brought a requested action to recommend acceptance of the report as complete, fulfilling the requirements of the Code of Virginia, and to transmit the accepted report to the Governor and General Assembly. So the procedure would be that TAC recommends acceptance of the report to the authority. The authority would take action this Friday at their meeting, their scheduled meeting for Friday morning. and then transmit the accepted report to the Governor General Assembly as required by the code. And AECOM is here to present the draft, and I mean, many of you are knee deep in it already and understand the ins and outs of the report, but in general, I think the progression of it has gone very, very well in a short amount of time, and the work that many of you have put in who are serving on this subcommittee, as well as our partners at DRPT and VDOT have done a lot of great work to get this to where it is today. And it's not the end. It's the beginning of kind of framing this discussion, and I think the report itself sets up a lot of next steps that could be considered both by the CVTA as well as local government members. So I think staff is in agreement that with the subcommittee that the report's in a good place to submit as required by the code and the legislation that sets up the authority. With that, I think this is probably the time, Mr. Chair, to turn it over to Stephanie and her team to kind of go through the highlights and then open up for discussion.
Yes, thank you, Chet. Stephanie?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for the pleasure to come to present just a high-level overview of this study. So today's presentation here is very short. It's going to talk about the main objectives and the final recommendations and findings. On Friday, there's another meeting where there's going to be a longer discussion of the approach and go into details for the whole study. So for this morning, I wanted to just briefly go over the overview of the study timeline. We starting from the June timeline, June 4th, we submitted the final report, the draft report, had the revised version with comments incorporated, submitted June 26th. And so today we are doing the overview, and Friday presents the final report with all of the changes and revisions already incorporated from that June 26th timeline. So our agenda today briefly is go over the purpose and objective of this study again, just as a refresher, just a brief overview of our approach, look at what we did in terms of the stakeholder outreach and the key governance issues we identified, and then finally go over our findings and recommendations for this study. So as many of you already know, this study was really birthed out of the new CVTA legislation that was implemented last year in 2020. And part of that legislation had a requirement for a 15% transit component for the levy that was the levy created as part of the CVTA. So for that 15% transit component, that funding goes directly to GRTC for regional transit purposes. So that being said, the objective really from the legislation's perspective of this study was first to evaluate the structure of governance for GRTC, which is the main primary transit provider in the Central Virginia region. Then 2 was to evaluate the establishment of a transportation district. And then 3, provide options for transit governance as it relates to the existing structure or the establishment of a transportation district. So this was the core. I would say that the RFP had many various goals as well, but they all fit into these main 3 objectives. And this was the objective for the study. So how we went about this to be responsive to the study's requests and requirements was First, reviewing the governance structure for GRTC. We followed that with a peer analysis. Now, the purpose of the peer study was to review a range of governance structures that are out there. So we looked at 4 different entities, 4 different case studies, with one of them looking at 2 agencies. That was in the Nashville area. But what we learned from that was just identifying what are the different approaches that agencies have when it comes to governance, when it comes to dealing with a multi-jurisdictional area as well. Next, we did a review of existing authorities in the area and did a CVTA, a benchmarking for CVTA against these other peers. Lastly, we looked at the transportation districts. We looked at the definitions, what the purposes are, and how one could be created in the Central Virginia area. We also looked at some pros and cons, what the potential advantages are and the challenges for implementing such a transportation districts in the region were, and looked at that using the perspective of how a transportation district could help resolve the governance issues that we had identified. And so finally, we synthesized the information we had received, or the information we had gathered rather, from our desktop reviews, from our stakeholder interviews, which we performed. We spoke to over 40 individuals from the CVTA jurisdiction, including members from the local governments, as well as the state legislature and GRTC, of course. So we synthesized that information to draw out what were the key issues that kept bubbling up to the top, and then synthesize that in a way to help us to answer the study's main questions and reach the objectives. So what we identified, like I mentioned before, first we had the study objectives that were these 3 on the left. That was to evaluate the governance structure, the establishment of the transportation districts, and then looking at options related to governance for GRTC or for transit in the region. In our review, in our stakeholder outreach, with the discussions from the various stakeholders, we also saw that certain issues rose to the top, and those are summarized on the right. That's highlighted as the identified governance issues. So these focused on decision-making and accountability, GRTC board representation, and a third issue that came up was the GRTC ownership structure and the implications that would have on any changes to governance. Now, these issues, we framed the findings using these issues because we realized that there were linkages with the main study objectives, in that by identifying or answering the issues that rose to the top for the stakeholders, we could answer the study objectives as well. So that's what you see with the different linkages between the governance issues and how we address the study objectives as well. So I'll go over these issues briefly. So the first one was with decision-making and accountability. This had to do with the one main thing that came up was the role of elected officials in the current GRTC structure. In that, the issue was that the current board, the current GRTC board, is a citizen-only board made up of representatives from the 2 counties, City of Richmond and Chesterfield County. So the question really was about how can we ensure accountability if 9 jurisdictions are paying into the CVTA Transit Fund, but then on the there's no representation from the elected officials. So that was an issue that what we had to look into. Secondly was the representation on the board itself, on the GRTC board itself. So there were we broke this into two main areas. One was Henrico County's role or representation of Henrico County on the GRTC board. And then the second was board membership for the rural or suburban areas in the CVTA jurisdiction. And then a third thing that came up with regard to the board representation, that is critical, and I put here because it was a key component of being able to move forward with finalizing what a revised board composition would look like. And that had to do with questions of equity when it comes to decision making, and what the board, an equitable board, should represent when taking into consideration different historical investments into the GRTC system over time. Finally, we looked at the implications of the existing ownership structure. So currently, GRTC is structured as a public service corporation with shareholders. So the two primary shareholders are City of Richmond and Chesterfield County, who both, they each own 50% of the company. And so we provided some recommendations of what this could look like in the future. So what are the benefits of keeping the structure as is versus changing it? Because compared to many transit agencies in the US, it was a very different structure looking at the shareholder perspective. So thinking about what would a revised structure look like, not necessarily with the board representation, but in terms of thinking about eliminating or doing away with the shareholder structure. So now looking at what the main findings from these key governance issues were. So the first one, like I mentioned, was with decision-making and accountability for that transit funding, that 15% that goes to GRTC. And from our research, we found out that there are various ways, various mechanisms that exist currently, either through existing processes or even provided through the CVTA legislation and the structure that is set up, that assures accountability for that transit funding. And also, it provides opportunity for elected officials to have a say in the use of that fund, that transit funding. So first, of course, is the presence of the elected officials from the various jurisdictions already on the CVTA board. We know that the CVTA board ultimately determines through the various subcommittees, approves any funding that is to be spent by the funding required for that 15%. So there's that oversight and accountability through the CVTA Finance Committee. Now the Finance Committee is made up of the four of the 9 jurisdictions. So we have the City of Richmond, Chesterfield County, Henrico County, and Hanover County. So with their presence on the Finance Committee, there is that oversight to ensure that the funding is spent in a way that is considered equitable or is considered efficient for the purposes that it was collected. With the GRTC, they're required to, the GRTC develops or will be developing the regional public transportation plan. And this plan is developed in collaboration with the TPO, the RTPO. Now the RTPO also has representation of elected officials. And if this is done in a collaborative process for developing the plan, then you can ensure that any issues or any needs are represented in the development of the plan. Now, this plan is supposed to target, or the goal of the plan is to identify how that 15% is going to be spent for the regional purposes. So this is the main avenue, I would say, for that allows for that collaborative approach for determining what that funding will be. The GRTC is also gets oversight. There's also oversight and accountability through the finance committee, like I mentioned earlier, and then the TAC as well. So through these different checks, we see that there's the opportunity for the local governments to influence or to be part of the decision-making process in a collaborative way with GRTC. It is not siloed, it is not independent, but then the processes in place are set to ensure that it is done in a collaborative way that assures that everyone has a say or their views are represented. So with this, the question about decision-making and accountability, specifically in looking at how the 15% transit funds are spent, from our findings, we determined that the existing mechanisms are sufficient to ensure that there's that accountability. That ensures that there's that collaborative approach, there's the oversight that is also required for the spending of that money. Next was the question about board representation, GRTC board representation. So we already know that Henrico County has interest in participating on the GRTC board. They made it official in April by petitioning the current GRTC owners. Because of the existing service provided in the area and potential for even that service to grow in Henrico County and their interest in participating on the board, we recommended that we recommended that Henrico County be added to the GRTC board. Now, when it comes to the question of board composition and voting structure, that remained, that would need to be, that remained not unresolved, but there's further discussion that needs to be coordinated between the existing shareholders, GRTC and Henrico County. And the course of this study did not allow us to have those kinds of discussions that need to take place. So we recommend that that continued dialogue take place to come to that agreement about what the final composition would look like and what that voting structure could look like. One component of arriving at a final board composition was the question of City of Richmond's financial stake in GRTC. It's our opinion that in order to move forward, I think there should be that collaborative approach between the city and and Chesterfield County and GRTC to resolve this issue of reviewing previous financial investment into this, into GRTC, because it is the city's opinion that until that is resolved, there is no way to find an equitable approach to determining what the board composition is. But once that is resolved through that collaborative approach of a lot of discussion and understanding what the actual numbers are, taking into consideration that even with investments, there's into capital assets or to fixed assets such as infrastructure or buses or any other kind of capital investments, there's things that could be considered, like looking at the useful life of those assets that were invested into. And that will also play a role in that discussion. But once there's that agreement, that discussion is continuing, some factors that could be considered in determining what an equitable board composition would be include this amount of service that is provided in the area. So looking at criteria such as revenue miles or revenue hours of service by the different modes, looking at funding for supporting fixed rail services, as well as the associated costs for paratransit services and those enhanced paratransit services as well. And once the full picture of the cost and need for that market is, the full picture for each of the jurisdictions is provided, that will give an objective approach to determining board composition and voting for the GRTC board. So like I said before, our recommendation is to consider including Henrico County as part of the GRTC board structure and have them in the discussions of what the board composition would look like based on the criteria and the issue of the financial stake also are reviewed. Next, for GRTC board structure was the issue that came up with some of the smaller jurisdictions or the other suburban, more rural areas that do not currently have GRTC service or a lot of GRTC service, if I were to rephrase. There were the different issues came up, but they can be summarized into three main areas. The first one was a general dissatisfaction about it was more of a dissatisfaction of feeling of contributing to GRTC through the 15% transit funding, but not having enough service or any service at all. So with that, because the CVTA legislation first has some checks and balances to ensure that this funding is really spent for regional purposes. So there's a requirement to keep the 15% funding in a separate account, which is dedicated to this CVTA funds. And those funds should only be used for regional purposes. Secondly, like I mentioned before, there's the development of the regional plan, the regional public transportation plan. That is a collaborative approach with the RTPO, but then there's also this opportunity for input from other regional partners as well. So through this approach, markets that are viable for transit service, whether it's enhanced paratransit or micromobility, whatever those services that are warranted services can be identified. And they can be analyzed further for the complete cost and the willingness to pay for any additional cost for this service as well. So that can be addressed through that process. The issue of contributing without service can be addressed through that process. Again, the regional plan will lay out the benefits or why certain projects are considered as a regional transportation project as well. Next was the concern of potentially subsidizing transit in areas outside of their own jurisdictions. Again, it's very similar of feeling, oh, I live in this area and I don't receive any service. Why am I paying into service in another locality? One thing that came up was about the legislation that allowed for the current funding from the local jurisdictions to be reduced to about 50% of the pre-CVTA levels. So there was, with that is that feeling of, oh no, you're reducing how much you're putting into GRTC and subsidizing that. But again, like mentioned before, is that the CVTA funding is separate and is going to be handled in that separate way to address those regional issues. And then finally, there was we spoke with various stakeholders that expressed an interest in having direct input on the GRTC board. In many cases, the desire to have that board seat was conflated with having GRTC service, like equating GRTC service with having a board seat. Now, these two do not have to be the same. And so what our recommendation for that is having GRTC finalize their process with their plan, having the jurisdiction see what the projects laid out are, and in areas where they have been reviewed and are considered to have appropriate need for that service that could, for the future, we can consider GRTC and the current board members can consider having an opt-in clause for those jurisdictions that would have some service and also want to be part of the GRTC board. And that it does not have to be a one-to-one ratio, but it can be it could be developed in a way that considers certain criteria to opt into the GRTC board. And again, you can look at factors such as the minimum size of the area, density, the need of service and for that particular locality. But you also want to consider the financial responsibility to GRTC's operations and supporting that service within that individual jurisdiction as well. So once those things are identified, next steps can be put in place for making a change in the governance documents and including this opt-in clause. But again, it should be any opt-in to the board should consider what the actual financial commitment is and the service for that area. Current service, current service or future service, and potential for growth as well. So for this issue, like I mentioned before, there's that potential to consider an opt-in clause based on criteria that are agreed upon by the board members. But some factors to consider would be the service need, viability, and the financial commitment. Lastly, we talked about the GRTC ownership structure and how it affects or the potential implications to any changes in the board structure. So as it stands, we have this structure where there's the owners of, and owners only in name, but owners of GRTC, and then you have the board members. Right now it's 50-50, and that reflects the representation on the board. And in the governance documents, there's the requirement to have any major board decisions, such as changes in the board documents or changes in structure, ratified by the shareholders of GRTC. Several board decisions that have to do with the day-to-day operations of GRTC would not need to go to the shareholders. But when it comes to major decisions, such as changing governance documents or something like the structure, it does have to be ratified by the owners. So then we have this structure where there could be board members from various jurisdictions that may not necessarily be part of the shareholders. Now, this is a very, it's an unusual structure for a transit agency. And so, so our recommendations for that is to consider eliminating the shareholder structure, considering that there isn't a marginal benefit of maintaining that ownership structure, especially when it comes to the financial side, where there's it's not only funding from the shareholders, but then there's also federal interest because there's federal funding that goes to support a lot of the initiatives and projects for the transit agency. So that could be considered, and just using the board structure, or making it a simple one-to-one approach of equating board membership with the quantity of shares. So then right now we have the 50-50 shareholdership between Chesterfield County and City of Richmond. And then on the board, we have 3 members each from the 2 jurisdictions. So that could be a way to avoid any complications in the future, to just equate board membership with the quantity of shares for the transit company. We also looked at a transportation district, and basically looking at first of all, the definitions, looking at examples of transportation districts in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And really in the transportation districts, they're implemented in areas where there's a need for joint action for some sort of major capital improvement. And this could include transportation or even public transit, where joint planning can ensure that the quality of life of the residents in the areas are enhanced. And so looking at transportation districts, we looked at some potential benefits as well as some drawbacks or challenges, and sought to understand whether establishing one within the Central Virginia area would have the marginal benefit would outweigh the potential challenges of implementing them. With considering the strategies that we already recommended for addressing the governance issues, we didn't find any evidence to show that the marginal benefit with establishing a new transit district or transportation district would outweigh the marginal benefit would outweigh the challenges with implementing or creating a transportation district. Considering the existing agencies within the Central Virginia area, there's a lot of opportunity for that collaborative process, even amongst the 9 jurisdictions for the CVTA. So at this moment or at this time, we don't recommend that a transportation district be set up, rather that the CVTA be given enough time to establish its processes so that in a few years it can be evaluated with how well the collaboration works, and also implementing the recommendations from this study, including the recommendations of having that, with some of them, require further discussions. So having that settled down, having those collaborative discussions, having CVTA implement plans that they have, having GRTC implement those regional projects, and then maybe we look at if those don't work, or the benefits of the systems that are currently in place, then it can be revisited at a later time, but not at this present time. So with regard to the main study objectives, looking at evaluating the structure of GRTC, that is completed in our final report. Establishment of a transportation district, that's also finalized in our report, and then having those governance options, which we also provide in our report. The options looking at concerning, board membership for Henrico County, as well as for the suburban rural areas. So at this time, I can take any questions that we have. Again, thank you very much. This has been a really good project, very collaborative approach, and we hope that we can take some of these recommendations and as the first step, and then move forward with them. So I can take any questions now.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any questions for Stephanie on the report? All right, hearing none, I will ask a question actually two questions. One, the presentation you just gave us, is that something we can share on the website chat under the meeting agenda?
Yep, we can sure do that.
All right, thank you. And is this the presentation you anticipate giving to the full authority on Friday, more or less?
Yes, sir. We're going to work with Stephanie to fine tune this for Friday's meeting. Unless anybody here has recommendations or thoughts otherwise. I think the focus should be the recommendations and kind of directly what the outcomes of the report are.
I agree. Does anybody have any other thoughts or opinions? All right. This other question may be as much for Adrian as it is for Chet or Stephanie, but we know that you're getting ready to kick off the microtransit study, which will obviously involve and focus to a large degree on the rural localities. So I guess we need to, figure out how the recommendations coming out of this report tie into that effort, because I don't think, to Stephanie's point, we fully know what services are needed in the rural localities until we get through that study, until we get more feedback from the rural localities. So I think that's an important, message for the full authority, if that topic of conversation comes up on Friday. I guess the further point to that is that the code and enabling legislation reference that the 15% of funds distributed to DRTC were for transit and mobility services and projects across the region. So that's not exclusive to GRTC service. So there could be other supporting services in localities that qualify under this 15%, and I don't think that's been fully vetted yet. Adrian, you're welcome to chime in on that.
Just to give, some timeline related to the microtransit, we have reached out to hopefully use the DRPT bench contract. Hope to get proposals back within the next week or so. Trying to move pretty fast with that particular study, and the goal is to get to start working with the jurisdictions and get something within the next 6 months or so.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Todd, I see Rhonda's raised her hand.
Yes, Rhonda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Todd and Stephanie, I have a question with respect to the GRTC and transit in our rural communities. Stephanie, both New Kent and Charles County participated in small group meetings where we had similar interest in what our needs were that were related to paratransit, as well as for lack of a better word, I'd call it commuter opportunities to transfer stations. And so it just kind of surprises me. Well, I guess my question is, where does that feedback fit into these recommendations?
Stephanie, you want to take a stab at that?
Certainly. So in our recommendations, what we discussed was about GRTC's existing plans that are in in place to determine what kinds of services are warranted in areas that do not currently receive DRS service and the total cost of those services. And so we understand that the regional public transportation plan will be looking at those kinds of projects of regional importance. So that would be where it would be, it would come up naturally.
Thank you.
And Adrian, if you have anything to say about that, that'll also be great.
Yeah, we plan on looking at that particular piece as well, not just limiting it to microtransit. I mean, the governance as well as the regional public transportation plan and the microtransit study will kind of all work together hand in hand. We're hoping the regional public transportation plan can kind of take what was done out of the microtransit study as priorities and then kind of put that in a more constrained prioritization, looking at the whole mode options that are available. So we'll be working through both of those.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Darana.
This is just a comment for Stephanie. I know I talked about it at our last meeting. One of the things that I think may be helpful is if kind of the 4 recommendations that you have that you kind of come to a conclusion with at the end of your summary or presentation is maybe in the beginning kind of asking those 4 questions that those recommendations answer. So, you know, what to Rhonda's question about the regional transportation and their participation in the process and getting the things that they need, you know, in clarifying, you know, the governance structure, look to see if because you say it, you know, the accountability is there for those regional partners to be represented at the table. And yes, it is there because of the representation on the CVTA, and then further defined with the transit, regional transit plan in which their actual, you know, strategies and implementations could occur. So again, looking just back at your 4 recommendations, it's going to kind of be key that you pose those questions so that the body gets, they feel like they get an answer at the end of the report, and you don't get too many questions, which technically you know, the report actually answers. But I think it would be helpful to really get to the point and clear and concise on how you're presenting it. And really, again, pose those questions that people have at the beginning and then clearly align them to the recommendations that that the report comes out with.
Thank you. I think that's a very good approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Darana. And Jennifer DeBrule was kind enough to post in the chat box the legislative language regarding the 15% that I was referencing regarding the GRTC or its successors to provide transit mobility services in Planning District 15. So to our point, it's not strictly limited to GRTC service.
But Todd, I would interpret that to mean that that funding goes to GRTC.
Right.
It's dedicated to GRTC, but it's not limited to providing fixed route transit service. It can be used for microtransit and other purposes.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Jennifer.
I agree.
All right, any other questions, comments, suggestions? All right, so Chad, if you clarify, the action requested is for the CVTA TAC to make a recommendation to the full authority at Friday's meeting on the acceptance of the report as presented.
That's correct. Yes, I have the resolution on the screen. The recommendation is that the TAC recommend the CVTA accept the report as complete, fulfilling the requirements of the Code of Virginia, and transmit the accepted report to the Governor and General Assembly upon acceptance.
Thank you. We'll entertain a motion.
This is Barb. So moved.
Thank you, Barb. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Diorama, second.
Thank you, Dorana. Do we have any questions or discussion? All right, hearing none, we have a motion and a second. Chet, I need to do a roll call vote.
Yes, sir. And we have everyone here, I believe now. So I will start with Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Aye.
Charles City County, Ms. Russell.
Aye. I'm sorry, aye.
Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Goochland County, Mr. Campbell.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Aye.
Henrico County, Mr. Yor.
Aye.
New Kent County, Mr. Stauder.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Chardon.
Aye.
And City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you, Chet. Thank you, everybody. Next item is CVTA TAC member comments. I will start out. Thank you, everybody, for those that joined us late to give us full participation. And I would like to
I'm good. How are you, Ms. Crump?
potentially single out Ms. Barbara Nelson,
yes,
who is
hold
joining
on.
us for the first time officially as a representative from Virginia Port Authority. As a non-voting member, I stand correct.
Yeah, and
So welcome, Barb.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right, anybody else have any comments for the group? All right. Hearing none, our next meeting is scheduled for August 9th. We'll remind everybody that there will not be a full authority meeting in August. At this point, I think everything that needs to be handled over the next several months will either be on this Friday's agenda, i.e. the transit governance report, or can wait till September. So there was no required action items during the month of August. That gives us time to hopefully get the prioritization process wrapped up and ready to go to the full authority at hopefully the September meeting. Chad, I'll defer to you to see if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's correct. I would ask one request following today's meeting. Everyone, please work with your authority members between now and Friday to brief them on the Transit Governance Service Report, so that they're prepared for discussion and action at that point. Thank you. And let me know if there's anything staff can do to assist with that.
Yes, thank you for that comment, Chet. All right, if nobody has anything else, we're ready to adjourn at just over 1 hour from our start. All right, thank you, everybody. We will see you next